Hello again. I have some bonus time here. Sorry again about what I'm wearing. Usually you imagine I have a very nice vintage Western shirt, which has white buttons, as you know, very rare. But just imagine I'm wearing that instead of the shirt I've worn for 3 days. Well, thanks for coming here to this Ignite. You know, I always like to start with kind of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. People often ask me, Coté, how do I get your job? They have various wheedly ways they ask it, but they want to know how you become someone who loses their luggage. And, you know, it's all about networking, really. You go work for a vendor, and your whole job is to hustle the vendor and make people think that it's great and how it solves their problems. And it really pulls together a whole bunch of disciplines and devices. You know, you got a washing machine, everyone loves IoT. So you have to kind of get up to speed on new technologies. Now, you spend a lot of time traveling. And if you're like me, you often wonder, how do they actually drive in Australia and New Zealand, where I'm going to be in a few days? I rented a car and I'm afraid I'm going to wreck, but that's kind of the approach you take to this job that I have, is you're not afraid to embrace something as you travel around. Now, there's a bunch of nonsense technologies out there that companies get excited about. And your job is to think about, how can I go in with that and talk about what they want, but I want to talk about the problems that you really need to solve. You know, you've got Cerner here, DST. Like, I'm sure AR is fun for their board, but really they're more focused on something that's secure and that works out very well. And, you know, I'm not a big security person, but I think that stop and think is very important. They've got to analyze what they actually want to do and what problems they need to solve. Not really worry about AR and virtual reality and strapping a phone to their face. Now, apparently, what I was going to talk about is security, something I know very little about. But the problem with security is that humans are always causing problems, right? So a lot of what we do in DevOps is remove the role of humans and their propensity to screw things up. Now, of course, what we're used to in security, if you remember the Equifax thing, is just a dumpster fire of how to think about this stuff, right? Like, you could have patched that stuff and it would have been fine, but really, I was thinking, as I was flying over here, like, life is just a series of dumpster fires, right? Like, you gotta learn how to manage it. Like, it's sort of, you know, like, I don't know if you ever heard of this company, Broadcom, but they're an interesting company. I used to work for this guy, John Swainson, who I think was on their board, and it was fascinating working with him. He used to be the CEO of CA. And, you know, I wouldn't call that sort of a dumpster fire, but it was interesting to see how he figured out how to evolve these businesses, especially as things like Linux and open source came around, and he was incredibly successful at it. And so you should deal with what you have, right? Always try to sell the software you have, not the software you want. And there's probably something about the software you brought or the one that brought you, but let's not get too much into Sinatra stuff. But over and over again, more nonsense, right? People just want to talk about nonsense that has nothing at all to do with medical records, providing internet to people, making it so that health insurance works well, banking, and so, you know, you always have to come back to that. Now, robotics is kind of interesting, right? And I don't get a chance a lot to talk to people in lab coats, which I would really like to do more, but it's good to start thinking about how these nonsense technologies help advance sort of humankind, right? It's always good to kind of end on a, I don't know, a positive note, sort of something looking forward. Now, of course, I always encourage people to make sure to get LASIK. Right? Like, if you have glasses, I had glasses for a long time, and have you ever tried to watch a movie while you're laying down because you're really tired? It doesn't work if you're wearing glasses. It's ridiculous. I guess now you could strap a phone to your face. Now, in the retail sector, when I go talk with them, they are not about nonsense. They're like, Bezos is coming to eat our lunch, if not more colorful things. So they're a good example of a sector that doesn't care about nonsense, about AR things. They really just want to know to improve their operations. Now, in that sector, I do have to admit, Bitcoin comes up a lot. I don't really understand what Bitcoin is, and everyone's on and on about how blockchain is great and things like that, but that's just self-admittedly not an area I understand. But I think there's a session later today on that, if you're interested in it, because it comes up so often. Now, have you heard about APIs and compatibility? This is something that when you get into an industry, you really do need to focus on. And I think going back to my original topic, which I usually forget by this point in a presentation, that's one of the things you need to be able to speak to, is many different technologies, like how is Pivotal Cloud Foundry competing with like OpenShift? Isn't that just Docker, right? How do I recharge my ability to do custom written software and make sure that I can compete with those people like Amazon? So really, the ways that you explain that and tell people that you understand and know their problems is a really great way to get to this kind of work. Now, the first thing you need to do is, if you don't have an internet presence, you don't publish a lot, you don't have URLs you can give out to people, you do need to kind of be famous and be known, which I think maybe about 10% of the people here know me, so I've kind of failed at that. But, you know, what you want to focus on is, sometimes you lead with the nonsense technologies on this content, right? Because it brings people in, and then you slowly bring it back to something normal, something that applies to people, that draws them in and keeps them coming back. You know, we used to call that sticky eyeballs and things like that. But that's really what it's about, is you get together a group of people, you talk about something interesting and new technology-wise, and then you connect it back to the thing that you're trying to sell them. Speaking of which, if you want to come over to our table, I can give you a great overview, and we've got some free books. We've almost run out, so you'll have to come over and check them out. And at the end of the day, really in this role, you're just trying to please yourself. So if you imagine yourself standing in front of a mirror, giving yourself a review, it actually becomes very hard to think that you're doing a good job because you really have no feedback loop. So that's one of the things that you want to do if you want to keep yourself up, is you need to start to collect all the successes that you had. And then I think you can do a job like this pretty easily.
There we go. Yeah!